Hello and welcome to the NIGP webinar, A Case for Change, Aligning Strategy with Action for Procurement Transformation. Today's webinar is being brought to you courtesy of Ivalua. For those of you who have attended NIGP webinars in the past, you know that from time to time we ask someone from outside NIGP to provide their expertise and unique insight into an important issue we want to highlight to our audience. Across the years, those experts have represented both the public and private sectors, academia, and the nonprofit communities. All webinar content is presented strictly for educational purposes only and is not intended to be an endorsement of our speaker's organization, products, or services. Today's presenters are Jared McAdoo, Dustin Lanier, Andrew Cochran, and Victor Olds. If at any time during the webinar you need tech support, please let me know in chat or the Q&A box. Remember to engage with your peers by making sure you have your chat option selected to everyone. Please submit any questions you have to the Q&A box on your screen, and we will take them during specified parts of the presentation. Jared, would you like to go ahead and get us started?
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. I will gladly go ahead and get us started. We have a wonderful number of attendees here today. I was just watching the numbers as we come in, which I think speaks very well to the topic we're going to discuss today, as well as the esteemed panel we have for this. So with that, I'll go ahead and just kick off the discussion so we can get to the meat of the presentation. So just want to talk briefly about some of the agenda items we're going to cover today. This is going to be a couple points that we're going to touch on, some thought leadership, some items coming across. I'll share some of the survey results that Ivalua worked with the Center for Digital Government regarding some changes in public procurement as a result of the pandemic. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dustin, where he'll give us some of his insights, which are always great. And then we're going to transition over into a panel discussion where we're going to answer a number of questions. We do have a number of pre-submitted questions for the panelists, but again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, please enter your questions in the Q&A. If we're not able to get to the questions as part of the webinar, we will attempt to capture all questions and follow up with you after that. So I would just, again, like to take this opportunity to thank you for coming and thank the other speakers and panelists that we have here today. We have Dustin Lanier from Civic Initiatives, which is always great to hear Dustin's perspectives. And we do have Victor Olds, Chief Procurement Officer from City of New York and the Director of the Mayor's Office of Contract Services on with us. And it's always great to hear their perspectives on their transformation. And it's great to have Andrew Cochran, the State E-Procurement Manager with State of Ohio Department of Administrative Services with us today. Hearing these stories directly from customers on the pain points, the successes that they've gone through as part of their transformation, I think is always helpful. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition into the presentation portion of it. I have a couple slides I wanted to touch base on, then I'll turn it over to Dustin, and then we'll transition over into the panel discussion. Again, if any time you have any technical issues, please refer out and we'll get those handled for you. And please don't hesitate to enter any questions in the Q&A. Before we get started going through a couple items, we did have a couple poll questions that we wanted to launch here. So we've launched that first one. So if you wouldn't mind taking a few seconds to let us know that what area from the government that you work for, we would really appreciate that because I think it helps us to speak to some of the items later in the presentation. So if you wouldn't mind answering that for a few seconds.
Yeah, we'll give everybody a couple more seconds. Looks like we've already got over 80%. And I'm going to go ahead and end it now. Fair results.
That's great to see. We do have a well represented at the city and county level here, which is great to see. And it's also great to see the education represented here. Wonder where the federal team is on this. We'll have to give them grief about it. So we did want to follow up a poll question. We are going to launch a second poll question and just ask the question, are you planning a procurement transformation either now or in the upcoming 12 months on this? So if you wouldn't mind, please, taking the opportunity to answer this poll question.
And we'll give everybody about 5 more seconds. hear results.
Okay, great. So we're just about 50-50 there on those items. So it'll be great to hear perspectives from both sides as we go through some of the questions and why we did this. So we'll go ahead and move on now to some of the parts of the presentation. So I did want to take the opportunity to share some of the learnings we had for the changing landscape of government procurement. As I mentioned, Ivalua partnered to launch a survey to a number of different levels of public procurement to see what trends came out of as a result of COVID-19. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, this isn't another presentation where I'm going to beat you over the head with lessons from COVID-19. Well, we're not going to specifically focus on the pandemic, but we're really going to see if we can extract some key lessons as we look through the data and as we talk to some people about what might have changed as a result of the pandemic that we will see become more normalized as we move forward with public procurement. So I'll just share a little bit of the insights we have here. So just to set the stage, what we did is, local and state procurement officers, we surveyed them because we understood that there were some rapid changes that need to occur result of COVID-19, not the least of which is how do you conduct yourself remotely when we're in the office, which is something everybody had to deal with. It really became a pressurized environment where we were able to see the weaknesses, but really the strengths in our public procurement because the public procurement really needed to adapt, and they did. It really wasn't an option to have a failure on that. So we're really able to see not only how they succeeded on this, but how they had to overcome some weaknesses in the processes or in the tools or just in some of the structure in order to get that done. So we issued this survey. We really were looking to answer some questions as how are the state and local procurement agencies changing to meet the new realities of this? What disruptors are creating the procurement change? And how do governments plan to overcome these challenges with technology? And again, a lot of this was pandemic focused, but I think coming out of a number of these items, really see how it shaped the landscape. I've talked about this and had some opportunities to do this on the commercial side when you talk about some supply chain issues. But I think even on the public procurement side, it's even more nuanced and even more important to talk about some of the things that we really see being a shift over there. So I'll share a couple of those insights now. So some of the key findings we had is as a result of the pandemic, and this really wasn't a surprise to us, there had to be changes to procurement processes in order to get this done. About 26% of the respondents we saw through these, they had to change policies, they had to implement faster procurement processes, they had to act with greater collaboration across departments in order to meet these items. If it was something as, I don't want to say simple, but is something as expected is, we had to initiate our emergency procurement plan, which most offices have on these, or we had to look at deeper systemic issues on how we able to speed up to respond to some of the changes we have. Some of the most important drivers that we saw the drivers of change, and this speaks a lot to just the efficiency and the process that we're going to see here are, there was a greater workload demand. There was a demand on everybody when it comes to public procurement to be able to respond, because again, if you had the normal, what everybody else was dealing with is people are impacted by the pandemic, but you also had to meet those requirements to support the public to be able to deal with the pandemic as well. So there really was, how do we manage the workload demand of our resources, the demand for faster and turnaround times and processing times. Because again, when it comes to items like, we'll bring up PPE because I think it rings well for everybody. We've seen it. You needed to respond to that. You had to respond to these emergencies. How do we achieve these efficiencies in the workplace? How do we vet new supplier capabilities? We're in a position where we were looking for goods and services, and how did we vet these new suppliers as we were looking around? And then how did we deal with a virtual model? Not having people together, not having suppliers be able to deliver the items in paper form like we maybe saw before the pandemic. When we look at the future procurement, procurement leaders anticipate the future model will really have these faster procurement processes. So a lot of things that we saw within the pandemic that, as we come through this and as we hopefully reach the end here soon on these items, they will slowly bleed away on these. But I think one thing that we're going to see survive this is we've really proved that we can add additional efficiency and speed into a lot of these processes. And that's almost going to become the expectation. We reset the standard on a number of these items. So I don't think we'll be able to go back to the way we were doing some things when it comes to manual processes or slower processes, because we've set a new standard to meet those. So, that's interesting. We really moved the bar on these as well. And this is something that's always been in public procurement, but we've seen it as a result of, the pandemic and the social unrest, and a number of items we saw as well as a result of supplier resiliency is, promoting diversity and inclusion on these items. And more than a third of the respondents said they hadn't made changes to their procurement practices to promote diversity and exclusion, but we also recognize that that was going to be a big part of these items moving forward. Is you were going to continue to see those items. So, building on really a lot of the successful practices we had in the public procurement side. So when we look at the impact of COVID-19 on the future procurement practices, as we mentioned here, we hit a couple of the top things, that we have at the top. The first is, what was going to be a priority here? What were we going to focus on? It was really about the faster adoption of IT goods and services. You saw to be able to respond to these items, to be able to work remotely, to be able to use a lot of these things really took a different focus on how do we adopt items, how do we move remotely. So I think we're going to have that focus moving forward too, and on how do we do that in a more rapid pace. And secondly, to go along with it, and right behind there, you see the digitally transforming the manual and the outdated legacy systems or just processes altogether. This became a necessity in a number of areas. I know we worked with a couple of our customers who had opportunities to solve this problem. They needed this right away. We were able to do that because you didn't really just foresee something like this happening to shut down everything we needed. And then along with that comes what we're going to see across the whole market is expanding risk. Expanding the risk mitigation, looking forward to see how it might impact not only supply chains in general, but how it might impact what we're specifically doing on these. So we're really going to be focused on moving forward based on the survey results is how do we enable this change from moving to that new standard? How do we do things quickly? How can we do things remotely? How can we tie in data sources? How can we consume and curate data sources quickly on these items? Now, as far as when we polled what was the priorities for modernizing the procurement process, we listed the top 8 here, and I don't think they'll be a surprise to anyone. The first is improved workflows. The second you saw anything move either from a standard process to emergency process, you started to realize how maybe inefficient the workflow was, especially if it was a manual process. You didn't have the opportunity to take things around, have people review it in hard copy and provide signatures on this, plus looking at the items within the workflow on, could I do this in parallel? Did I need all these reviews? So being able to improve the workflows on these items, not just from the standpoint of leaning them out, but doing things in parallel, doing things electronically to go along with that. Then you see items like better employee training, which is expected because we're talking about the introduction of new technology and processes. So to need to be able to deliver those items out there. Taking a look at the procurement policy. There was a number of, as we mentioned here, about a quarter, 26%. I do believe I just referenced 2 slides ago. They had to make changes to the procurement policy. This did a couple things. It allowed us to, meet the needs of this respond, but it also gave us the opportunity to pressure test whether we could make some changes to the policy, but still have the controls in place that we needed, because those policies, those controls are in place for a reason, what we do in public. And it gives us the opportunity to have some confidence in looking back at those, saying, are there additional optimizations or changes I can make to still keep that level of control and transparency, but be able to lean out the process or make it more efficient. So, and again, items like technology for remote work, that's to be expected. We sort of dealt with that in real time. E-procurement technologies go right along with that, as you're going to route requisitions, as you're going to route purchase orders, as you're going to route contracts to be able to do those type of items. And then as we see other items, utilizing data analytics to be able to take a look at the data, that's something we saw before, we'll continue to see. Looking at centralized procurement office options, and improving vendor diversity is again still there, on the list here. It makes the top 8, as we would expect it to see in public procurement. So as we look through this and we sort of synthesize what lessons we have, from the pandemic, and as we move forward, as we have greater opportunity, as you're going to see with focuses on infrastructure and other funding items that will be coming through, is we really have the opportunity to reshape how we're going to do work, reshape some of the policies. But it's also going to be incumbent upon us, is we'll have some big projects ahead of us. How do we efficiently manage those, keep those to the level of control and transparency that we have for that? So it's really an opportunity for us to take something good from something bad. We showed we can do things, as you would always expect from public procurement. But now how do we transition that over into setting a new standard in being able to take care of some of these items? And along with that, you'll see the, some of the discussions that we'll have later, how modernization, digitalization really fuels into these, as well as just a healthy sense of skepticism, as we mentioned, on how we've always done work. Now, with that, that was a mouthful. I tried to get that out quickly because I really want to turn it over to Dustin Lanier, for his part of the projects, because he's going to give us some perspective on procurement change agents. So Dustin, I'm going to be quiet, but I know I'm controlling the slide. So if you just want to give me a signal, if I miss changing a slide, I'll be happy to do that.
Great. Okay. Well, I was asked to talk in a more general level about what's involved in trying to drive change inside of a procurement shop. And that's often going to be involved with a technology project, but it can be even on like the policy development, the process improvement, and ultimately any actions we take, whether we're currently implementing a technology solution or not, are going to feed back into this ability to have this change agent approach. And we've been involved in several e-procurement projects, both either in terms of the scoping or implementation. And ultimately, benefit realization is about people and how people drive and interact in these tools. So come forward one. So it's a mindset and a skill set. So we need individuals at all levels of the organization, help procurement organizations to grow and to perform in unprecedented times. And it's a whole of the office responsibility. I know sometimes, I always really enjoy getting to talk to NIGP, and it's a blend of the frontline and the leadership and the people who've been there for 30 years and the people who are on the way up. And so this isn't to one person. It's about anyone in an organization can be an agent of positive change, regardless of where you are in the organization. Next slide. I'll rephrase and repeat a little bit of what Jared was talking about. So it's been a long 18 months since COVID came. So I used to work for the state of Texas, and when we were in the Emergency Operations Center, the IT folks and the procurement folks were often to the right in the Emergency Operations Center. COVID brought us to the front and the center because supply chain was the core of the problem. So it really drove and elevated procurement to the center of the problem. And so first that was PPE, and then vaccine and vaccine distribution. And now ARPA is a different element, but it's going to also put pressure on procurement shops to be able to execute on tight timelines and with a lot of external scrutiny. So, but in the COVID era, of course, we know the vendors were stretched. We couldn't depend on a single vendor, on any of our longstanding vendors to necessarily be able to meet and fulfill. And so we had to stand up new vendors who had to be pursued and vetted, and new processes built on the fly, new systems built on the fly. And then logistics also became a real responsibility of purchasing, in the sense that in the past, purchasing could assume if they placed an order, they would get an order. But under this paradigm, we had to both try to secure the supply and then make sure it actually made it into our warehouses. And this was all while all the traditional work was being done. So we didn't have a difficulty in executing our car contracts, but then once all of our people moved away from the car contracts, now suddenly we had a crisis. And then today, if we're trying to source cars, the traditional supply chains, constraints that were in that PPE and the COVID side have bled into traditional sectors. So if you guys have tried to source vehicles recently, you know that computer chips in cars are creating a constraint, as well as the shipping supply issues in the Gulf. So next slide. So what that collectively means is that we're poised at a new plateau. A lot of automation did happen during COVID, and more will be on the way. So procurement in many cases was considered to be core internal infrastructure, like the facilities or the security, and had never anticipated leaving the building. And then suddenly they were told to leave the building. So a lot of things that have been put in place from governance that are longstanding held beliefs, like paper bids and blue ink on signatures, or the signatures don't count, notaries on every page, or else it's not legal. A lot of those melted away. They either melted or they transformed to allow this ability for electronic implementation to occur. So technology improvements that might have otherwise literally taken generations happened in quarters. So procurement did demonstrate that work could happen remote. And so a lot of the kind of things that I'm really looking forward to listening to Andrew and Victor talk about are how to solidify some of these changes and these gains and drive it forward to where procurement really is a strategic asset within their organizations. So this mindset that I talked about, so a change agent helps a procurement organization move to a strategic stance by a handful of things: looking for opportunities to gain time by eliminating drag, use time to create some of the strategic capacity that really lets us lean into automation and really drive that strategic capability, and then make sure every time that a staff person touches something that it's creating maximum value. So there's 100 examples of eliminating drag. I described a few of them in a slide ago, where I was talking about blue ink signatures on pages and that sort of thing. It's just critically examining whether the processes that we're following, whether they're still justified and there still is a basis for them, or is it something that's carried forward from the past and we can't really explain it, but we continue to do it. So drag is both processes that no longer are relevant or hold us back from being able to automate. Another example of drag is when we do individual transactions because that's the way it's always been done. And if we were to example, say we did 100 catering solicitations in the last quarter or the last year, and could we take those and turn them into a master contract with task order type purchasing if it's the similar vendors, and it would make it easier for the end user, easier for the vendors, and importantly for this conversation, automatable, because we can't automate 3 phone call bids for catering, but we might be able to automate a service catalog related to a catering service. So when we're doing single transactions, when we could have really examined whether there was enough commonality to create something new, it's that cutting the lawn with scissors. It's not that there's anything wrong with cutting the lawn with scissors, but we can't do it at scale. So an example of that would be, where are we generating the most transactions that we don't have a master contract? And does that signal a weakness in our contract portfolio or a gap that we should address in order to be able to automate that more in the future? Next slide. So when we talk about procurement being a strategic asset, purchasing, of course, is incredibly important, and it's the core beating heart of a procurement shop. But in and of itself, it does not help to create procurement to be seen as a strategic asset or a compelling career destination for the next generation. So when we talk about how do we build capabilities and enable the procurement shop outside of the grind of the transactions, that involves things like how we look at our policy and process. Are we able to then build training that associates with it to help teach our end users how processes work? Make sure that our purchasing staff knows how to do market analysis, alternatives analysis. Just because we've always had these 4 contracts for fuel doesn't mean that that's the only way we could ever purchase it. So what are the alternatives? And what would be the sourcing plan if we did that, to communicate it at a business level to executives? Driving up to the the highest expression of that, which is category management, managing at the level of the overall spend of which contracts are a component, but really thinking about all the transactions and all the potential that transactions that could happen in an area, and being thoughtful about building an ecosystem, which would include system style solicitations, task order style solicitations, that catering example I said a second ago. That then leads into, could we express our contracts in the form of a catalog? Could we make it so that the purchasing process that we deal with the complexity and the difficulty of the process in order to make it simple for the end users, that expresses itself in the form of a catalog that then is the driving heart of a procurement automation project and a project management. There's a lot of components to e-procurement, of course. Marketplace is not the only one, but certainly I'm interested here. I know that Andrew has done a lot of work on trying to make that part of it come together. So I'm interested in how that's come together. Next slide, please. So maximum value from every touch. So sometimes our staff can be afraid when we talk about these kind of changes or the automation. Does this mean that I am at risk by these projects? And I think that leaders need to speak to this topic. I'll be interested if our panel has had to deal with that. Speak plainly to the topic that each staff that we have is finite and precious. We need every staff person, and trying to improve processes to make the maximum value out of every person is not an effort to reduce our line staff. It's an ability to make sure that each touch has multiplying value. So when we're doing work, can we build a tool? If we're going to have to do a template for our end users based on our procurement manual, can we build a template that can then be automated, whether that's through an Adobe form or a send-in? Can we make something that drives self-service, that takes that complexity and makes it simple, where we allow the end user to operate at their level of expertise? And if a touch has limited value, if it's one-to-one, I did this, I made a 3 phone call and I executed that work, there's no dishonor in that. And in fact, that's a very honorable work set. But if we look at and we say, can we do more with this action? Can we get more value out of when we did it? Then it will allow us to really assess cleanly whether the process should be redesigned, or if it's needed. Are we adding value with the step that we're doing? And critically, I'm sure you've all heard the phrase, the Great Resignation. I did a speech on this for NAEP yesterday, where I think there was 25 million people that resigned their jobs in the first part of the year, and up to 40% are considering it. So we need to be really aware of how the work looks and feels with our staff, and build something that allows them to really build in a career path. So if they're asked to absorb our inefficiencies, then they'll eventually opt out of the work. Next. I'm almost done. So one person can lead by example, can create small wins, can make this value case, can create the innovation opportunities for strategic goals of the entity. I'm trying to go a little quicker so we can get to our panel. Go ahead. And some people on this line may say, well, I'm not in charge, or I can't drive. There's a lot to be said for leading without authority, really thinking about the ability to spark change, to spark conversations, and set examples for others and how you have stance, and really expecting a lot out of the function and then being willing to shoulder part of the work to get it to that place. I think the last slide is next. So I'm a fan of the theory of constraints, which is expressed through this book, The Goal. It's a good sort of novel style business book if you haven't read it. So basically, this book says in every organization, there's one place, one constraint, that if you were to focus on it and raise it, then you would raise the whole capacity across the organization. So in a change agent mentality, really giving thought to what is the one constraint in your organization that if it improved, it would flow through the rest of the program. And I like theory of constraints because it's very focused. Some of the other methods to come at work can topple in on themselves sometimes because they're too big. This, I think, is a way to really say, what's the most impactful place that we could make difference? Next slide. That's it. And Tara in our chat said, leading without the title can be more effective because you can set your ego aside, and sometimes you can make those who have the title think the change was their idea. It is absolutely so that leadership can come from many places in the organization. And so don't think that that if you can't do everything, that you can't do anything. And with that, I will hand off and join in the panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Dustin. I appreciate the insights there. And we're going to transition to the part of the panel now. So again, we had some pre-submitted questions that came through for the panel, and we've broken it up into 2 blocks of questions. But again, I encourage you, and thank you, Tara, for putting your thoughts in the chat. We encourage that, and please submit some questions as well. So starting off with the first question here, and I'd like to throw this out to all the panelists, but we'll start with Andrew, just because his name starts with an A, so we'll go in alphabetical order to be fair on this. So, each of you have been very involved with public procurement transformations. Can you provide insights into what governments can do during the early stages to lay the foundation for success when it comes to modernizing procurement? So, Andrew, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Sure. Yeah. And sorry for the camera here. I'm not. It looks a little funky on my end. Hopefully, it looks okay for the participants.
You look
good. But yeah, no. I think one of the things that came to my mind as I kind of contemplated that question, and it probably sounds simplistic, but for us in Ohio, it's been key to have executive support. We have been incredibly fortunate over about the last 7-8 years to have very strong interest, very strong buy-in from the highest levels of our administrations, and that has been just so important to have that backing and that support, and knowing that we can kind of rely upon that to go and push further, ask questions, talk to different people, and put strategies together. The other thing, a couple of our thoughts. One was talking to peer states has been absolutely key for us, and really kind of helping our director even. I remember about 7 years ago, we had our director in a conference room. We got to talk to the Commonwealth of Virginia, that was kind of one of the pioneers in e-procurement, and really kind of helping to establish that relationship and kind of facilitate that. Getting that peer state buy-in, that peer state feedback, I think was incredibly important for us, and it really kind of helped to forge some partnerships early on in the process that really continue to pay dividends even to this day. And then the last thing that I kind of thought of it, with this question was, just be looking at those opportunities to generate interest from executives. And it's not, not always something that maybe is, positive to kind of use as an opportunity. You might have some setbacks along the way that you can kind of transform into a sort of that focusing event, or that sort of driver for change. I know in Ohio's case, there were certainly some of those things that we were able to capitalize on and kind of, turn something that wasn't a great thing into something that kind of led us on the path to transforming our procurement systems. And so, I think a lot of times we kind of look for, what's the positive thing that we can capitalize on to build interest, but, don't overlook some of those other things, some of those lessons learned along the way, that you can kind of take those lessons learned and turn them something into, something that's more positive.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. And Victor, I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, well, I agree with the thoughts that Andrew shared. Just to build on it, I guess, for us, it was really important to make sure that we had a shared vision of what the problem was that we were trying to solve, and then also having a shared understanding of what it looks like to solve that problem. We needed to make sure that we were being transparent with the procurement staff on what our transformation roadmap looked like. And I mean, the truth is that change is not easy, and we needed to do a lot of work, I think, to prepare people for the changes that were coming. In the city, we have a decentralized procurement model. That means that my office acts as a procurement oversight, but then there are other agencies that actually do the purchasing. And so what that means is that you have a lot of different agencies that have developed their own practices of doing things. You have a lot of idiosyncrasies, you have a lot of challenges that go along with that. And so you have sort of practices that don't necessarily align within the broader group. And so we had to build a common understanding of what the problem was that we were trying to solve, and then get people to agree on the right way to solve that problem so that they could be prepared for the changes that were coming in their practices. I mean, our main goal was really trying to ensure that everybody was rowing in the same direction. And that was really critical for us at the outset, as we were mapping our transformation.
Yeah, that's a hard discussion sometimes too, because they almost feel like you're calling their baby ugly if you want to ask about their process on this. Dustin, from your perspective, because you do have a unique perspective on this, anything that you might want to add?
Yeah, I'm trying to not be repetitive. I would say, look at the organization that you have from every chair in your org chart, and also the view of the stakeholders. And would this organization and would the processes make sense from each chair? And that's one of the best places to be able to start a conversation about what is the role of this organization and what does it need to automate. If you don't have a good definition of what the need is and where the destination is, then sometimes these projects can become a dog chasing the tail exercise of technology for the sake of technology, as opposed to a business project that needs technology to meet to a goal. So I think really understanding, can you understand the mission of the organization from all of the chairs, and get people on the same page on how an automation exercise and a modernization exercise will help you carry forward. I think really make sure that you keep people together when the project gets hard in the middle.
I agree. And one thing I'll add, to this is, I'll echo what Andrew said. And, all the years I was in, a public procurement or working with it, I didn't have appreciation on how easy it was to benchmark and talk to your peers, and how willing to share the information is, till you make the change over to the private sector and realize no one's ever going to talk to you. And what a truly valuable resource that is, to go through, to be able to, lessons learned is not stub your toe the same way. Especially when you're dealing with projects. So it's a great community. I'm going to go to the next question. And Victor, I had tabbed this one for you as, transformations done in a silo. I think we all know they're doomed for failure. From your experience, who needs to be involved in a cross-functional perspective, and how do you get them excited about the transformation? Going back to some of the points you just made, as well as, it's a personal project and they have their own way of doing it.
Yeah. Well, for us, we really focused here on trying to ensure that we had wide-ranging buy-in from all of our stakeholders, and they were internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. But the people who would be directly impacted by the transformation that we were undertaking. And then I think we had a realistic view of things, right? Some people will be more enthusiastic about that change than other people. And one of the things that we found to be really helpful was really zeroing in and leveraging the people who were excited about that change, and using them to be champions for the change that we were undertaking. So they, instead of us being the ones who were always beating the drum about the necessary changes that needed to occur, as people began to share their excitement, and as that spread in some ways organically, it really helped us to move the project along. We also had a unique situation in that we had established some degree of success early on. We had done a smaller transformation project in one area of our procurement process. So we had the health and human services sector that underwent a transformation before the rest of our procurement sort of broader sector, and the folks that interacted in that space were able to see a lot of the benefits of the changes that we were trying to now implement in other sectors. And so they wound up being our champions in a lot of cases, to say, well, look, this wound up, although some of the changes along the way might have been difficult to adapt to, this really wound up being helpful for us in the long run. And there is light at the end of the tunnel of this change. And it really helped to convert some other folks who might have otherwise been less enthusiastic about the change, or more skeptical about what the impact would be along the way.
I think that feeds into what Dustin and even Tara's comment we mentioned, as we discussed, is getting those, regardless of title, to show some excitement and evangelize, really helps on these. So I'm going to go ahead and transition to the next question. And Andrew, we had this one for you is, which is good because it's a state of Ohio specific question. So if Victor got it, we would be in trouble. Throughout the entire transformation journey, the state of Ohio has kept a strong focus on the state agency involvement. How did you successfully bring the agencies to the table, and what strategies have you used to continue the collaboration throughout the journey?
Take myself off mute there. I think the biggest key to that, and it's really kind of the key word in that whole question, is collaboration. One thing that we have been, incredibly diligent about for a long time now is making sure that our e-procurement journey has always been characterized by this is a solution for the agencies. They're the ones that have those core missions that they've got to carry out. And so for us, it's very much been bring them along with us throughout every journey or part of the journey. So what we did actually about 6 years ago now was we held a couple of Kaizen events to basically start by analyzing the agency procurement process as well as the central procurement processes. And really looking at that, taking the time to kind of walk through that, get feedback on what's working, what's not working, and really prioritizing that voice of the customer. I think that on the front end really kind of got us a lot of goodwill built up with the agencies. It brought them to the table. They made them feel like they had a voice. And then what we did is we started to kind of take those lessons learned and those sort of outcomes from those Kaizens. We transitioned into starting to develop the RFP. What we did was basically held listening sessions, went out and talked to different groups of stakeholders. We've got some unique suppliers that are also state agencies here in Ohio. We talked with all of them. We talked with the agencies that actually do the purchasing, the people in the field, the agency procurement officers. And then what we did was, active listening, play that back, make sure that we were understanding what they were saying, transforming those things into RFP requirements. And again, making sure that feedback loop was just continuously there, continuously open. And then ultimately taking them right on through, they were part of our RFP evaluation team. They had an active say in the solution that we selected. And then as we kind of moved into the actual deployment of the solution, really tried to continue that theme. So we actually brought agencies into the design sessions. And in a lot of instances, we kind of kicked the decisions to them. We said, you guys have to use this. This is really intended for you. You lead the charge. You tell us what the system should look like. And then having them actually play that back to their peers, right? So as we were kind of going through and putting training together, we were having those agencies actually sit out there, sort of stand up and lead by example and explain that to their peers. Hey, here's why we decided this. Here's why we think it's a good thing. And then throughout the process, what we've continued to do is we've put them on our leadership, on our steering committee that's really kind of tasked with sort of directing the strategy and the direction of our e-procurement program, and doing monthly sustainment meetings. So we have a meeting every month. We bring the agency leads in, and it's very much an open dialogue. How's it going? What's working? What's not? If we've got enhancement requests, you guys tell us, does it make sense? Does it not? And really the only tricky part there is having to kind of balance and make sure we get to a consensus. Obviously we want to try to make sure that everybody leaves the room in agreement. We don't want to do something to benefit half of our agencies and alienate the other half. So that's really been the only tough part, is trying to kind of balance, the different perspectives. But it really has always been about, our e-procurement solution is a solution for the agencies, and, our agency, Department of Administrative Services, we're there to sort of superintend it. We're there to kind of help make sure that the system is up and running and doing what it's supposed to do, but really letting the agencies kind of drive that direction in terms of what it should look like and how it should function has just been so key for us. And I think that's really, what we can attribute a lot of our success to today.
That's excellent. Have you seen, and I know getting consensus is always a struggle no matter what you do, but, throughout this process, have they been more willing to look at some of their must-haves? Like, did they have any sacred cows that, they aren't so sacred anymore?
Yeah, all of the agencies are unique, right? They all have a slightly different core mission. Sometimes they're not quite as unique as they might think they are. But really the key for us has actually been, just facilitating that cross-agency communication, having people in the same room, and kind of talking through use cases, and to let those agency leads kind of hear from each other that, okay, wow, I'm a very centralized, very small agency. I never thought about it from that perspective of someone like a Department of Corrections that's decentralized and has institutions all over the state. And that really has done a lot of goodwill, I think, amongst the agencies, right? They're kind of opening up and they're saying, okay, you know what? I hadn't thought about it from your perspective. That makes sense. I can see why you do it that way. Yeah, we can live with kind of this hybrid that'll sort of accommodate both of our needs. So we have, had some agencies that have let some things go. But we've also, had agencies stand up and say, hey, this is really important to my mission. And the rest of their peers have been, I get it. Here's kind of a hybrid that we can use to make it work for everybody.
Great. And one more follow-up, because I saw it come through the chat. I just caught out of the corner of my eye. Did your transformation, how far did they flow down to the agencies? Did they go all the way down to the local agencies?
So that's actually part of our strategic vision, is to ultimately take our solution and make it available to local governments, institutions of higher education. That obviously brings with it a whole nother level of collaboration and communication that's going to be needed. So that is absolutely something that we've got our eyes set on it, and something that I think we'll be able to apply a lot of these lessons learned to those stakeholder groups, which in their own right are going to be very unique, have a lot of different perspectives. But that is something that we're planning to do here over the next couple of years.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you, Sharon, for the comment. I'm going to go to the next question here. And, Dustin, I wanted to throw this one out to you. In an ideal world, every government would do a full-scale transformation, but the reality is budgets and resources are not always available. For those with limited resources, what processes, along with the procurement value chain, would you recommend prioritizing? And again, I understand this is sort of a high level because, all things are different, but, from your experience.
So I guess it depends on where somebody is in the journey, right? If they're at nowhere, I think the source to contract parts of the organization are a great place to automate or to prioritize making sure that it works well. So the process of posting and receiving solicitation responses and being able to hopefully deal with them electronically, because it both creates efficiency, it creates the organization as a modern business partner, and it helps reduce the where's my stuff or what's the status phone calls that will come in from vendors on where is this and how can I work with it. And so that should be something that almost everybody is doing, and COVID really drove. Internally, I would say the process of being able to understand how the requisition flow is coming in a way that is going to actually spark the need for a purchasing event that, again, allows the end user to be able to know where the status of their request is. We did an assessment in a program that where we were looking at the IT procurement process, where it was having to go between the CPO and the CIO office, and at least half of the phone calls that ended up getting tracked and marked in a period were the equivalent of where's my stuff, because it wasn't clear who was responsible for it, where it was in the process. And so even if you haven't made a commitment to a full e-procurement suite, having some sort of a process where we did something where we built it into a Salesforce module to be able to flow a requisition management process across. So those would be two things I would look at early. And then I mentioned in the presentation that if I was trying to create some headway for either a strategic sourcing type program or towards a catalog creation process, I would look at where are the transactions in my organization that aren't associated with a master contract, and do they categorize themselves in a way that would then speak to a gap in the contract portfolio. Sometimes we don't create new contracts because we perceive that contracts are based only on the request of an agency. But a lot of times procurement may identify an area where it wants to have a master contract because it would be faster for the end user and create more overall spend management. But if there has not ever been a culture that procurement initiates as opposed to only receiving requests from agencies, then the likelihood that there's something in that spend data that would show a gap that should be addressed that would increase the value for everybody is high. And the end users, they may come in and out once, they may not be thinking about a long-term machine, but those are some great places, I think, for procurement to start to try to find some efficiencies.
Those are great points, and it sort of speaks to right there is give procurement the right data and the visibility, and they can uncover the opportunities. So for the next question here, I want to throw this out, and Victor, we'll start with you. Is outside of cost savings, what are the potential benefits that need to be communicated throughout the government that will assist in achieving the executive and employee support on this?
Sure. And let me start by just acknowledging that cost savings are important. We all know that, but then it's not the only thing. For us, we had a really simple problem, uh, and we needed to figure out a way to solve it. And it wasn't really just directly tied to cost savings. We needed visibility into our procurement process. So before we launched Passport, which is our digital procurement process, we had a paper-based system. Things were happening in an inefficient manner, and we just had a hard time tracking and knowing where things were. And you can tie it to cost savings to solve that problem, but we really just had like an efficiency and an oversight problem, especially for my office, which is in charge of overseeing the procurement process in general. So we had agencies and really oversights, because there are others in addition to ours. We have a centralized law department, we have a centralized office of management and budget, and we all play various roles within the procurement process. But folks weren't really able to see what was happening at various points along the chain, and they weren't sure what one oversight was saying to the entity that was doing the purchasing, or what they were saying to each other. So we needed a system that would allow us to just see what was happening all in one place. We needed a fishbowl, I guess, to see what was going on. And that also had some other, helpful consequences. We were able to see where there were bottlenecks in the process that in some instances had been long-standing, but we just weren't able to see those things before. And we were able to sort of then further iterate on our system and on our roadmap to figure out how to create efficiencies that we didn't even know had the potential for being implemented before that. So these things touch on cost savings, but there are other things that go even beyond that we were able to see once we were able to just take a step back and have more of a bird's eye view of the system overall.
Yeah, and I think from the standpoint is I've seen some of the work you guys did, Victor, on you building your flows, at least from your beginning state and as you move through, and they speak 1,000 words when you show some of those, is all the various touch points and all the things you have to consider on these as well. Andrew, from your perspective, how would you answer this question?
Yeah, well, I will start by saying, Victor, I completely agree with what you said about that transparency aspect. Incredibly beneficial, really starts to kind of shed a whole lot of light on where the bottlenecks potentially are. So couldn't agree with you more on that. A couple of other thoughts that came to my mind, one of them being, when we're talking with executives, one of the things I think that we found to be helpful historically is, procurement's a complex process, right? It's a lot to take in, it's a lot to learn. But I think one of the things that we found is to kind of just explain that value of what's the value of compliance. You can't necessarily put a number on it. It's hard to quantify the value of it. But you can start, executives especially can really kind of gravitate to, if this is something that's going to make sure that we don't have an internal audit or an audit finding issued against us. We show up in the newspaper. That can be a tool that you can use. It's certainly not the only one. I don't think you want to approach it just from the negative aspect like that of keep us out of the paper. But it has been a tool that people tend to understand. They tend to gravitate to that and say, yeah, you know what? I can see the value here where if we're doing things and we have more assurances that transactions can't be done outside of compliance, outside of sort of being in compliance with the law or rules or policies. That's been something that has been helpful for us. I think another potential benefit here from the employee side of things has been standardization and kind of, driving towards a single platform. And if historically, at least in Ohio, we're coming from a place where we had multiple different systems, multiple different passwords, a lot of silos, if you will, to speak to those employees and say, hey, you know what if we give you one system that you've got to log into and you can have complete visibility, right? And you can kind of see, how did this sourcing event tie to this contract, that tied to this purchase order or this receipt or things like that, has been very valuable to them. Yeah, getting away from multiple systems, making their lives easier day-to-day basis, making it easier to kind of see the connections between different things has been something that we've been able to capitalize on and really generate some excitement from the employee's perspective as we've moved into an e-procurement system.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Boy, you take me back there. The first mentor I ever had when I got in public procurement, when he was trying to change my mindset on how I looked at decisions, would always say, how does that look in the paper? If you had to read that in the paper tomorrow, how would that look? And it really does. He started with the value of compliance there. So it's, I think that's a really great point. So Andrew, I'm going to stay with you for the next question. When developing the RFP, who should be included to ensure the requirements will meet the needs of both central procurement and the agency needs? And I think you touched on this some, so you don't have to rehash it all because I thought you gave a really good answer. But any fine points you would like to put on this one, and then Victor, I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah, I think I talked about a lot of this earlier, but I guess two other points that I'd kind of throw out here. I think one of the things that I kind of thought about as I was looking at this question, getting to those people who actually do the work, right? So often I think a lot of our tendencies, leadership roles, we might look at it and we might say, well, we can kind of take it on, we can write it, but it's really critical. Get down to those people that are in the weeds every day that do the work, because they're going to have the sort of the best beat on, how does it need to work? What do we need to articulate as the requirements? The other thing that I'll kind of say there is when we went out to engage agencies, we did, we basically looked for who are those agencies that had sort of those common needs that could kind of represent their peer agencies. So some from big agencies, some from smaller, centralized and decentralized procurement operations. But then we also went out and we actually actively sought out those that we knew had very unique needs. And in particular, in the state of Ohio, that was our Department of Transportation. And we made sort of a strategic commitment very early on in the process to say, we want our DOT at the table. They ultimately are going to bring a ton of value to us if we want to get all of the addressable spend through the system. And so we really went out there and sought them out and said, you know what? We know that you guys have a unique system. We know that you do things a little bit differently than everybody else. Come be a part of this. We want your perspective at the table. And that's something that's been tremendously valuable. So it's kind of, goes to that adage of sometimes you got to kind of seek out those that maybe aren't your biggest supporters. Bring those people in, give them a seat at the table. Chances are they're going to have good perspectives, but it also really kind of helps you sort of bring them in to where they feel like they're part of the solution. They're able to contribute, and ultimately, you're much more assured that you're capturing, those unique use cases that are absolutely valid and that you need to account for.
And I would agree. I mean, I just echo pretty much everything that Andrew just shared. We believe that agency leadership needs to be engaging with the business folks and the program folks really at the earliest stages of any sort of RFP or solicitation that's going out. And just as Andrew was saying, you have the agency leadership and they establish the vision for a particular procurement, but then you have the actual procurement professionals who are responsible for the legal review, financial review, the program review, and those are the people who know how to execute on that vision. And you need those folks all to be in lockstep, moving in the same direction. And they also are a lot of times more familiar with what the limitations are to whatever the executive vision is. So they can tell you where the pitfalls are, how to move forward, what to avoid. And you just need all those people talking to each other at the outset. And when they don't, you often wind up having to reissue solicitations or having things be delayed beyond what was initially planned for. And we found that just the most effective procurement shops here in the cities are the ones that are working together at the very beginning.
Thank you for that. We're getting towards the end of the questions and through the end of this, the session. So if anybody has to drop off, I completely understand. I don't want to miss the opportunity with this panel. And again, we are recording some of these items. So, Victor, maybe I'll stay with you on this one. What tips or lessons would you like to share that can help procurement leaders who are looking to fast track their modernization efforts? Is if you had one walking away point.
Yeah, I think we touched on it a bit before, and I would say don't just focus on cost savings alone. I think that a lot of times that can be the thing that you lean into to garner support for the transformation that you're looking to make. And I think that as you really zoom out and you look at what the problem is and how you're trying to solve that, you will find ways to pinpoint cost savings along the way. I mean, those will come, but you also want to be looking at the broader sort of issue and what is the most appropriate way or most strategic way to address whatever your biggest issue is. And I think taking that view as opposed to just where can I save money along the way is a much better approach to kind of fast tracking what to hit. I also think that you just need to look at what you can uh, what is appropriate to zero in on first. So for us, it was ensuring that all vendors entered into the city through the same portal. We didn't have that initially. And so you had vendors who had a different experience even at the outset before responding to a solicitation, just signing up to do business with the city, figuring out how to provide certain background information for integrity disclosures. Those things were managed in a different way among the agencies. And so we realized that one of the things that we really needed to focus on for us to kick off this thing and to get it started was to send everyone through an initial portal, and then that helped to build off of that starting point and then figure out what the other big ticket items were that we needed to invest in.
Great, Andrew. Would you, your tagline on this one is, what do you do to fast track modernization?
Yeah, two quick thoughts. I think one of them for us in Ohio has been grasp on to where you can get momentum. Don't let it go. Look for opportunities where it's good enough. These systems and just procurement modernization in general, there's so many different things you can look at. There's so many different dials you can turn. It's sort of this concept of, don't strive to be perfect. Frankly, I just don't know that it's really possible. I've also kind of got a continuous improvement background, so maybe that's just kind of how I'm wired. But look for those opportunities where, even if we can't leverage every piece of functionality in every nth degree of the solution and the features, what do we have to have in place so that the core transaction can be completed? And if we can get that person in the door, we can get those agencies to start using the system, we can start to derive some of the value from it, then that's going to kind of sell itself. And those people are going to be inquisitive. They're going to want to know, well, how can I actually do this other part in the system as well? That's going to kind of come naturally. And so I would say, if you want to fast track things as well, in Ohio, one of the things that we did when we went live with our e-procurement solution, we stood up a P card release first. We said, we're not going to try to develop integrations right now. We're going to go with a very limited set of catalogs, a very limited set of data, limited set of users. Let's get that out the door first. Let's kind of just build upon that interest, build the excitement, and just, in iterative sort of waves, let's keep sort of adding on to this thing. And I think that's been so critical for us, because if you do step back and look at what all you're trying to do at one time, it gets very overwhelming very quickly. And so it really comes down to, can we chunk it up, and how do we kind of, break this into little increments that we can kind of just get these quick wins.
Excellent point. Excellent point. So guys, we have just a couple more questions, and I appreciate you hanging in there for me. So we're going to talk a little bit on the next couple questions is, about optimizing procurement for a better tomorrow. So, Dustin, I wanted to throw this one out to you, with the unprecedented federal funding that it's going to be flowing to the state and local governments. What are some of the core areas that governments need to modernize to ensure the funds are spent efficiently and effectively? And you probably hit on a couple of these points too, but just taking a little bit of the different angle on this as well.
Well, the old tenet that use one-time money for one-time things so that you don't create long dependencies that won't be supported is obviously important. And so within then the question about where can money be spent to be maximally impactful. We're supporting a couple of different entities right now in sort of a virtual PMO on some of their ARPA funds, and we're seeing construction and facilities obviously is an area that you would expect to see, since a lot of the ARPA money tends to have that shape. I think also when I mentioned before that procurement, the connection between procurement and the logistics and the supply chain, I think has, for places that have ERP systems, well, of course, e-procurement, if e-procurement wasn't done at the start of COVID, should be obviously on the list, but then even further and more specific down, the connection between procurement and the supply chain characteristics. So things like automatic replenishment, being able to understand the spacing and where warehouses are, I think is an area that's going to be highly invested in. I'm interested in if the other panel folks have any view on where they're trying to consume some of that money where it's efficient and effective as well. So
Thank you for that perspective on there. You know, Andrew or Victor, I don't know if you have anything to add, but maybe I'll push on to the next question to be sure we get through a couple of these. You know, Victor, I did want to ask you is, your city of New York has taken the great steps recently to meet your diversity goals. Can you provide some background on this initiative and the steps the city took to enhance the diversity of suppliers, which again, I'm excited about this because I always like hearing this because I think you guys have a really great story.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think to sum it up, the city really just got serious about making contracting with minority and women-owned businesses, we call them MWBEs, a priority. And it started at the top with the mayor establishing an office within the mayor's office to oversee MWBE procurement. And that meant creating MWBE officers within each agency to review solicitations and contract awards and having regular meetings on agency performance to ensure that they were utilizing the tools that were available to them. And then that really led to looking at the tools that were available to them and seeing what changes needed to be made from a legislative standpoint or more at the local level within just our city's procurement rules. And so we've made a lot of those changes to allow us to have additional levers at our disposal to help to provide mentorship or to help to provide sort of a segue into subcontracting or even prime contracts that vary in dollar ranges, allowing for areas where we know that there's a lot of MWBE availability, but there hasn't been a lot of utilization to work with agencies to figure out why that is and then to create tools that are uniquely tailored to those types of contracts where we know that there's a large pool of availability. But it really started with setting a very aggressive goal. The city, or the mayor set a goal of hitting a 30% utilization within the city. And that was at a time where I think that we were hovering in really the high single digits. And so it was a very lofty goal. But with these sort of practices and procedures in place, we've been able to come very close to meeting that in a short period of time. And so I think it's a testament to what can be accomplished when people are really bought into a shared vision.
Yeah, I think so. Looking at the numbers, you know, there just to see where you guys started and where you've advanced. We did get a question in the chat. Do you also have you know, sort of a localization focus to it, even if it's adjacent or within the MWBE? Is you guys are focused on you know, city vendors as well as part of your consideration?
So we don't have that. There are certain contracts where that is a focus, but there's not a broad ranging program for that. Our ability to implement this was based on our MWBE program was based on a disparity study, and there are certain constitutional considerations that we had to implement, and then there are other state law considerations that we had to tackle. And so our program is really focused on the things that were supported within that study and meeting those thresholds. But there are certain solicitations that are more geared towards a local vendor. It's just not as wide ranging of a program, I'd say.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to finish up here with a question, and Andrew will throw it to you to start out with. Is can you provide one aspect of public procurement modernization that you believe is currently being overlooked? We've talked about what we would do first. You know, that in the next few years we should maybe really asking ourselves as a group the question: should we be doing this now or thinking about it now, or should we be focusing on it sooner than we are?
Yeah, so one thing that has really kind of come to light with our e-procurement journey here in Ohio has been, and it kind of taps into some of the things Dustin was talking about earlier, supply chain management, and particularly managing those suppliers at such a level that we know that the contacts that we have in the system are good. One of the things that we're continuing to find is in Ohio, you know, my department, we don't actually own the supplier record. So that's actually our partners at the Office of Budget Management. And so, you know, how do we kind of manage that supply chain in such a way that we understand who those contacts are and that we understand that those things are being kept up to date? You know, tens of thousands of suppliers, very hard to do. And so, you know, you start to get into questions about, do we treat all suppliers equally in terms of, you know, sort of pushing them for updates on contact information? Public sector, you know, you start to get a little uneasy if you talk about treating suppliers differently. So I definitely think that's a consideration. But so often I think we just kind of assume that the suppliers are keeping their records up to date. There's a lot of data out there, and if it's not up to date, then we can't interact with those suppliers for sourcing events, for purchase orders, for contracts, things like that. And so I would strongly just kind of emphasize the importance of how do you kind of create opportunities to engage with your supply chain. How do you make sure that you're kind of prompting them on a regular basis to get in there and review that information. I think at least in Ohio has been one thing that we're really seeing as, okay, you know what, this is something we really need to make sure that we're being diligent about as we move forward.
Victor, I'd like to hear your perspective on the same question, please.
Sure. I think it's going back to where we started, which is as a result of the pandemic, I think that there are things that we have seen that were ingrained within the procurement process that we don't necessarily need. Things like wet signatures, notarizations. I think that there was a pretty robust list there, and I think that those are the things that we are starting to look at now, and that we should give a lot more focus and attention to see, what are things that are slowing down our procurements unnecessarily. We have the ability to do electronic signatures now. We have the ability to do other types of things that used to be done in a paper-based way that can gain lots of efficiency, because we were forced to figure out how to do those things, under dire circumstances and for an extended period of time. So what lessons can we learn from that and now incorporate into our everyday practices?
Great. Well, thank you very much. We've reached the end of our questions, and I know we went a little bit over here, so I appreciate the panelists and the attendees hanging in here with us. Gentlemen, it was an absolute pleasure. I can't thank you enough. It's a ton of great information from your individual stories of implementation, plus from the very insightful perspective that Dustin provides us on this. So we deeply appreciate you taking the time to share that information. And again, this is part of what makes public procurement great, is to be able to have these type of people sharing this type of information on this. So again, is there anything from the NIGP side that we should say about the follow-up before I conclude the webinar?
Yes, I just want to let everybody know, I just want to thank our presenters and our audience for their participation. Please take time to fill out the evaluation survey. Once we end the webinar, you'll receive a prompt to take that. Both the recording and survey links will also be emailed to you later this afternoon. So thanks everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.